In this video, we're going to add command line parameters to make our script a little bit more flexible. So in the last video, we created this really kind of a crude example of a word counter using the counter from the Python standard library. But there are several problems with this. So first of all, the file path for the text that we're going to be parsing is hard-coded inside the script. And so is the number of the most common terms that we want to pull out. And if you're going to create like a, let's say, production utility, what you would do is, you probably want to have some flexibility with this code, right? You may want to be able to pass a different file path so that you can use this on different files without having to go in here and change the code. And you also may want to extract a different number of top terms from each text, right? And again, you don't want to go back and change the code, every single time you want to make these changes. And so the way we implement these features is by using command line arguments. Another thing that's kind of a pet peeve of mine too is when I run the script, it does something right away. So even if I run it without any arguments, it automatically does this thing. And if I, and I'd like to be a little bit more explicit of what I'm doing, especially if it's a tool that I don't really know about. I should be able to, just run it and get the help without it having to make any changes, without it actually doing anything. So we're going to implement some command line arguments to our script. So I'm going to comment out the print statement for now, and kind of start going over this with you guys. So we can import the sys module, and then we can print what's called sys.argv. And sys.argv gives you all the command line arguments of when you actually wrote the script. So I'm going to run it with word counter, and then you're going to see that the sys.argv is a list, and the first parameter is the name of the script. And so I can pass in, let's say, the file name, like alice.txt. And then that will be the second argument. And I can go through and I can pass other additional arguments separated by spaces, and then they'll all go into this list. And so one approach would be to use the sys.argv and just parse the list and say, okay, what's the second argument, what's the third argument, what's the fourth argument. And that was that's definitely a doable approach, but just because you can do something doesn't mean that you really should. And again, going back to the standard library, there's a cool module called argparse that lets you build command line arguments into your program very easily. So let's go ahead and import it here. Import argparse. And then let me go ahead and get rid of this. And so the first thing we need to do is create a parser for our arguments. So parser, argparse. And we can provide a description of our program here that'll get printed in the help message that the argparse will generate for us. So word counter help. And then here we can just add specific command line arguments. So this is going to be the number of words that we will look, the number of top terms that we want to extract from the file. So I'm going to create this argument. So we'll pass it to the program using -- words followed by the actual value. And here I'm providing some more information so that argparse knows how to actually construct this argument. So it's going to be an integer, and it's going to have a default value, of 5. This means that if you don't provide the value, it'll use the default value, but you can very easily override it through the command line, which is a very kind of Pythonic way to implement input parameters, right? You don't want to have a lot of mandatory parameters. You want to have them be optional with some reasonable defaults. And here's the help message to the user. So let's say number to extract, and then let's go ahead and add another for our file. Oops. This one is going to be a string type, and it is going to be required. And let's say help. All right. All right. So this this last statement will tell the parsers to go ahead and parse these arguments. So let's go ahead and I'm going to print this to the screen so that we can play around with this. So by default, when I run my script without any input, I get an error message saying, okay, there's some required parameters that are missing, which is nice and very helpful and a safe way to have it error out and exit. And I can run word counter -h, and I'll get a nice help message so that the users know how to use my program. Right, so here we have the word counter help, which is the description message that we passed along over here. And then we have two parameters, so words and file. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that the general nomenclature, if you have an argument that's going to be spelled out in words, is to have it prepended by 2 hyphens. And then if you have an argument that's going to be just 1 letter or an abbreviation, you can do it with 1. And we can do that here by having a second name for these arguments. So I'm going to do this one. It's going to be -f. All right, and so now we can run help, and then we can see here, okay, we can pass in -f followed by the file, or we can do the more descriptive, longer version in -- file. And then let's see. So now let's go ahead and run and pass some arguments. So -f, let's say alice.txt, and we see here this is actually the args. This on line 9, and it prints the input of the file we passed it, and the default words is 5. And if we wanted to, we can change the default words to 10. So let's go ahead and wire this into the rest of our program. So we need to go through and basically let's actually leave the print statement here, and then remove this file path and instead use args.file, and then we're going to come down here, and instead of having this hard-coded value, we're going to say args.words. Alright, and let's go ahead and try it out now. Let me clear the screen. Alright, look at that. And so we still have a print line over here with our arguments, and now we're getting 10 words. We can change this number to 1 and 3. And so the cool thing here is that now we can modify the behavior of our application without having to update the code, just by adding this little bit of code to make it more flexible. And we also made our program much safer in the wild, because if you run the program, it actually doesn't do anything. Typically, a script that you might write might connect to the database, may make some data updates, and again, it's much safer to have a script that'll just print out some some helpful message to the user instead of executing something when you just run the script without any arguments. So I hope you found this valuable, and stay tuned for the next video.